When people from different places looked at Earth's behavior during big peace summits, they always noticed something strange. Earth would send famous diplomats, calm speakers, cultural experts, and even scientists who studied human behavior. But not once did Earth send anyone from the military. It didn't matter how important the meeting was, or how many other worlds brought their full teams. Earth always followed the same pattern. This habit confused many people for years, and nobody ever got a clear answer. Some said Earth wanted to look peaceful. Others thought Earth was hiding its real strength. A few believed that Earth simply did not trust military leaders in delicate meetings. But the truth was that no one really knew. This question caught the interest of one researcher who had always been curious about how humans think and act. He had spent many years studying old documents, learning about different cultures, and observing how communication changes between groups when emotions get involved. He never thought he would get so deeply involved in this particular mystery, but the more he heard people talking about it, the more he wanted to understand. He felt that if he could find the real reason behind Earth's choice, he could help remove a long chain of misunderstandings. The first time he noticed this pattern was at a large gathering where leaders and representatives came together to find solutions for shared problems. He watched how different worlds presented themselves. Some places arrived with high-ranking officers standing proudly beside their diplomats. They believed this showed unity and responsibility. Others brought legal advisors, security teams, and strategic planners. But Earth arrived with relaxed smiles, soft greetings, and peaceful energy. They talked openly, shared stories, and listened more than they spoke. But their group was missing something obvious. There were no uniforms, no medals, no sharp expressions, and no faces trained to stand in formation. It was unusual, but at that moment, he didn't think too much about it. Later, he began noticing this same pattern again and again. Over time, it became impossible to ignore. Whenever a major summit took place, Earth's delegation looked almost the same. A few senior diplomats, some communication experts, cultural advisors, interpreters, and sometimes even artists who understood human expression. But never a military figure. He started asking himself simple questions. Was it a rule? Was it a tradition? Was it something Earth decided long ago and forgot to change? Or was it a strategic move to influence others? None of these possibilities convinced him completely. He tried reading official statements, but Earth never explained the reason clearly. Their answers were always polite and general. They talked about the importance of peace, dialogue, and cooperation. They said they believed in calm conversation and understanding. But they never explained why military members were not invited. Many listeners assumed Earth avoided the topic because it was sensitive or embarrassing. But the researcher could tell something was missing. He felt the truth was simpler, more human, and more connected to Earth's emotional history. This thought pushed him to start digging through old archives. It wasn't an easy job. Most of the old reports were not organized clearly. Many papers had been stored carelessly, and some were not even translated into languages used today. Still, he kept going. Every night, he sat surrounded by piles of documents, trying to identify patterns. Eventually, he found a few small pieces of information that caught his attention. They were simple reports from a very old summit, long before many people alive today were even born. The reports mentioned an uncomfortable situation involving a military representative from Earth who apparently spoke too directly during a discussion. His tone had been sharp, and his words made the other group uneasy. Even though nothing serious happened afterwards, the moment created tension and forced Earth's leadership at the time to apologize and clarify their intentions. The researcher found this incident fascinating. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't dangerous. It wasn't the kind of event that changed the world. But it clearly made a big impression on Earth's officials. Humans often carry emotional memories for a long time. Even a simple mistake can become a lesson passed quietly from generation to generation. He wondered if this small misunderstanding had been the seed of Earth's long-lasting decision. Still, he needed more proof. He went through more interviews, old speeches, and personal notes from diplomats who had attended peace meetings many years ago. Slowly, a pattern started forming. People described Earth's desire to avoid unnecessary tension. They explained how Earth wanted everyone to feel comfortable and open during discussions. They repeated that peace talks should not feel like a place where pressure or authority controlled the room. Earth believed that the best solutions came from open hearts, not strong voices. This concept appeared repeatedly in their notes. The researcher began to understand that Earth's choice was not based on fear. It wasn't about weakness either. It was about avoiding the memory of that old mistake. Humans tend to overcorrect their behavior when they feel they have done something wrong, even lightly. It's a very human trait wanting to prevent any chance of repeating an embarrassing moment, especially in front of others. The idea that Earth simply wanted to keep the environment gentle suddenly felt more believable than any political explanation. As he continued, the researcher found more details that supported this understanding. Some diplomats wrote about how the energy in a room changes when military officers sit at the table. They said people become more cautious. They choose their words differently. They hesitate before expressing ideas. Earth feared that this could block honest communication. The researcher could imagine it easily. Even in everyday life, people act differently when someone with authority enters a conversation. They adjust themselves. They speak more carefully. They sometimes become nervous. Earth simply didn't want this kind of atmosphere during fragile peace-building moments. The more he read, the more connected he felt to the reasoning. It made him think about how humans behave in family arguments, workplace meetings, or personal relationships. Whenever the situation is sensitive, people naturally try to avoid inviting anyone who might unintentionally create stress. They prefer bringing someone calm, understanding, and patient. Earth was doing the same thing, just on a larger scale. He realized Earth wasn't hiding anything. They weren't trying to look pure. They weren't trying to send a message. They were simply following a cultural pattern that grew from a very human emotional memory. It was almost surprising how simple the reason was. Something that started with one misunderstanding in the past had become a habit, a tradition, and eventually a part of Earth's identity during peace summits. This discovery made the researcher admire how quietly humans carry their lessons. They never told the story loudly. They never announced their decision publicly. They just adjusted their behavior and continued forward. However, the misunderstanding among other groups remained because the explanation was never openly shared. It was no one's fault. It was just one of those things that happens, and people assume instead of asking. By the time the researcher reached the end of his study, he felt he was seeing Earth through clearer eyes. He understood that humans were not avoiding military officers because of fear, strategy, or secrecy. They were simply protecting the fragile space where peace is built. They believe that peace grows best when the room is filled with open minds, not symbols of power. The researcher felt satisfied, but also curious about how others would react once they learned the truth. He hoped that knowing this simple human reason would help bring more understanding and maybe even bring worlds closer together. If you want, I can prepare Part 2, 1,500 words in the same style. The researcher decided to look deeper into Earth's history to understand why this habit started. He wanted to know what caused humans to avoid sending their military to peace summits. He began with old archives, ancient news reports, and personal diaries from diplomats who had been part of international gatherings. As he read more, he started noticing a pattern. A long time ago, in the very first global meetings, humans made a mistake that would shape their behavior for generations. It wasn't a huge, world-changing event, but it left a strong emotional mark. At that first summit, Earth had sent a mix of diplomats and a few military officers. The diplomats were careful, polite, and patient, as always. The military representatives, however, spoke in a direct and forceful manner. They were not aggressive on purpose, but their way of speaking created tension. Other delegates felt pressured, misunderstood, or even a little scared. The meeting did not go badly, but it became clear that the atmosphere had changed. People were less willing to share their ideas openly. They were hesitant and cautious. By the end of the meeting, the diplomats had to spend hours calming misunderstandings and reassuring everyone that Earth had no harmful intentions. The researcher was fascinated by this small incident. He realized that humans often remember moments like these more strongly than they realize. Even minor misunderstandings can grow into traditions over time. In this case, the lesson became a kind of unwritten rule. Never bring military officers to peace talks. The diplomats who lived through that first summit had talked about it repeatedly with their successors. They emphasized the importance of keeping discussions safe, calm, and pressure-free. Over the years, this practice became a habit. Even though the original event happened long ago, its impact lasted for generations. As the researcher dug further, he found more examples of how humans applied this lesson. He discovered that in later summits, Earth's leaders would carefully select who could attend. They preferred people trained in communication, psychology, or cultural understanding. They also invited individuals who were good at listening, understanding different points of view, and keeping conversations calm. Military representatives were never included. Even if a conflict arose somewhere in the world, Earth believed that sending soldiers to peace talks could make others uncomfortable. The decision was not about hiding military strength or showing weakness. It was about creating an environment where peace could grow naturally. Read interviews of retired diplomats who explained their reasoning in simple words. One diplomat said, "We have learned that power can sometimes scare people. Even when we mean no harm, others may feel threatened. Peace talks are not the place to show strength. They are a place to listen and understand." Another diplomat added, "Our military is very capable, but their presence changes the energy in a room. People stop speaking freely. They measure every word. That is not what we want when we are building trust." These words helped the researcher understand that the decision was not a rule imposed from above. It was a natural human choice that had grown out of careful observation and experience. The researcher also realized that this habit reflected a deeper aspect of human behavior. Humans value emotional safety. They understand that people share their true thoughts and feelings only when they feel safe. If someone intimidating or authoritative is in the room, others hold back. They speak cautiously. They avoid showing weaknesses or making mistakes. Earth had noticed this very early and used the lesson to create a safe environment for dialogue. The habit of excluding military officers was not about hiding capability or avoiding responsibility. It was about giving every voice an equal chance to be heard. He also found evidence that humans had debated this decision many times internally. Not everyone agreed with it. Some argued that the military should be included to represent all parts of society. They believed that showing full representation would build trust with other nations. Others disagreed strongly, insisting that peace talks were not about showing power. They argued that including the military could backfire, creating tension instead of harmony. These debates were never public. They happened quietly in offices, meeting rooms, and private discussions. Despite disagreements, the decision remained the same. Military officers would not attend peace summits. This showed the researcher that humans were careful, but also consistent. They learned from the past, observed the present, and shaped their behavior accordingly. As he continued, he discovered that humans had also learned from mistakes made in smaller settings. Not all misunderstandings happened at international meetings. Sometimes conflicts arose between communities, workplaces, or even small groups within cities. Whenever people brought those with power or authority into delicate discussions, tensions increased. They learned that the presence of authority could unintentionally create fear or defensiveness. Over time, humans applied the same lesson on a global scale. If a small conflict could be worsened by a commanding presence, it made sense that global peace discussions, which were far more sensitive, should be protected from similar risks. The researcher also noticed that humans are very reflective creatures. They do not always act immediately, but they spend time observing and learning from the past. In this case, the lesson from that first summit was remembered, discussed, and adapted over decades. The careful selection of delegates was not random. It was based on observation, experience, and human understanding. Humans wanted to create an atmosphere where ideas could flow freely. They wanted participants to feel safe enough to speak honestly, ask questions, and share suggestions without fear. This small act of mindfulness became a defining feature of Earth's diplomatic approach. The more the researcher studied, the more he appreciated the human touch in this decision. He realized that it was not driven by laws, rules, or regulations. It was driven by humans' natural tendency to care for one another's feelings and experiences. They wanted everyone at the table to feel equal. They wanted discussions to be open and honest. They wanted mistakes or misunderstandings from the past to guide them in making better choices for the present. This approach reflected patience, empathy, and humility, qualities that humans valued deeply. By the time he finished reviewing all the historical records, the researcher felt he understood the core reason for Earth's behavior. It was not a strategy to fool others, not a sign of weakness, and not a secret plan. It was a conscious decision to prioritize understanding, listening, and emotional safety. Humans had learned that the best way to build lasting peace was not by showing strength, but by creating a space where everyone felt respected. This lesson had been quietly passed down through generations, shaping the way Earth interacted with the world. He also realized that this habit had another important effect. Other nations often misunderstood Earth's choice. They sometimes thought humans were hiding something or trying to gain an advantage. This misunderstanding created curiosity, gossip, and speculation. But in reality, the decision was simple, human, and grounded in experience. Humans had learned that peace does not need intimidation or authority. Peace grows from dialogue, trust, and understanding. This simple human truth had been guiding their actions for decades. In the end, the researcher felt a sense of admiration for humans and their approach. It was not perfect, and it was not always understood by others, but it was deeply thoughtful. It reflected a careful study of human behavior, history, and emotion. By choosing not to include military officers, humans demonstrated patience, humility, and respect for the delicate nature of international cooperation. They showed that even small lessons from the past could shape decisions for generations, creating a tradition that focused on peace and understanding rather than power. The researcher also realized that this was a story about humans themselves, not just about diplomacy. It was about learning from mistakes, caring for the feelings of others, and using experience to make better choices. It was about understanding that true strength does not always come from power or force, but from patience, empathy, and a willingness to listen. In studying Earth's decisions, he felt he had learned something universal. Humans, when guided by reflection and care, have the ability to create environments where peace and cooperation can thrive. By the time he closed the last folder and sat back, the researcher knew that he had uncovered something important. Earth's habit of not bringing military officers to peace summits was not a mystery after all. It was a story about human wisdom, experience, and emotion. It was a story about how a small mistake long ago had led to a careful, thoughtful practice that prioritized understanding and harmony. And he knew that sharing this insight could help others see Earth's choices not as strange or secretive, but as deeply human and meaningful. The researcher continued his study by looking at modern diplomatic culture on Earth. He wanted to understand how humans approached peace talks today, and why they still followed the old habit of not sending military officers. He visited diplomatic offices, read interviews, and even spoke with retired diplomats who had spent decades attending international meetings. The more he learned, the more he realized that humans had developed a very specific way of approaching peace. It was thoughtful, careful, and deeply human. Humans believed that peace came from conversation, understanding, and trust. They felt that military officers, no matter how professional or polite, carried with them an aura of authority and power. This was natural, because soldiers were trained to lead, protect, and follow rules strictly. While this was important in the right context, humans had learned that such energy could unintentionally create pressure at delicate discussions. If someone felt watched, judged, or influenced by a presence of authority, they might not speak openly. They might hide ideas, hold back concerns, or even avoid participating fully. Earth's diplomats wanted the opposite. They wanted people to speak freely, share concerns, and collaborate openly. The researcher found that Earth's diplomats were trained in very specific skills. They learned how to listen carefully, understand body language, and notice subtle cues that indicated discomfort or hesitation. They studied psychology, sociology, and even conflict resolution to better handle sensitive discussions. They practiced patience, empathy, and careful speech. They were trained to guide discussions without dominating them, to encourage others to speak honestly, and to build trust gradually. This careful approach was part of the culture that had evolved over many decades. He also discovered that humans were very conscious of the energy in a room. Even in ordinary life, people adjust their behavior depending on who is present. If someone intimidating enters, conversations change. If someone powerful speaks first, others listen more quietly and sometimes censor themselves. Humans understood this instinctively. They knew that in peace talks, the goal was not to show strength, but to make everyone feel safe. This insight shaped the way diplomats were chosen. Only those who could create a calm and open atmosphere were sent. The presence of military officers, even without aggression, could change the mood too much. The researcher noticed that Earth's approach was based on subtle observation rather than strict rules. No law said military officers could not attend peace summits. It was simply a cultural habit passed from one generation of diplomats to the next. Young diplomats learned from older mentors that peace discussions worked best when dominated by conversation and empathy, not uniforms or medals. They understood that the goal was to build long-term trust, and trust could be easily damaged by a perceived presence of power. He also studied how diplomats handled negotiations. They focused on listening more than speaking, asking questions instead of giving commands, and carefully choosing words to avoid misunderstandings. They would observe reactions, notice pauses, and adjust their tone or approach depending on the room's energy. All these practices were designed to ensure that everyone felt equal, safe, and heard. The researcher realized that sending military officers, no matter how respectful, could unintentionally disrupt this delicate balance. One retired diplomat explained it in very simple words. Peace is about understanding, not power. It is about making people feel comfortable enough to speak honestly. Soldiers are trained to lead and command. That is useful elsewhere, but not here. If someone feels watched or pressured, even slightly, they hold back. And when people hold back, real solutions cannot emerge. Hearing this, the researcher felt he understood more clearly than ever why humans avoided military representation. It was not about fear or secrecy. It was about creating an environment that allowed communication and understanding to flourish. He also realized that this approach reflected a larger aspect of human society. Humans value fairness, equality, and cooperation. Even in daily life, they work to ensure that everyone has a voice. In a classroom, for example, teachers create spaces where shy students can speak without fear. In workplaces, managers are advised to avoid intimidating new employees when discussing sensitive topics. Humans had taken this same principle and applied it on a global scale. They understood when delicate matters were being discussed, anyone with power could change the outcome unintentionally. The lesson from past summits had taught them this very clearly. The researcher also noticed that humans were highly reflective. They did not make decisions impulsively. They observed, learned, and adapted over time. When Earth chose to exclude military officers, it was not because of a single event or simple rule. It was the result of decades of careful thought, observation, and experience. They had learned that when discussions were guided by calm, patient, and understanding individuals, peace was more likely to emerge. They had learned that influence could be subtle, and that creating an atmosphere of trust was far more powerful than showing authority. He found examples of how this approach worked in practice. At one modern summit, a complex dispute between two nations was being discussed. Tensions were high. Delegates were nervous. But Earth's diplomats listened attentively, asked questions gently, and encouraged others to speak. They shared stories of cooperation from their own history, helping people relate to one another. They noticed even the smallest gestures, like crossed arms or hesitant glances, and responded with care. The meeting eventually ended with agreements that had seemed impossible at first. The researcher realized that this success would have been more difficult if military officers had been present. Even silently, their presence could have made people cautious and defensive. The researcher also reflected on how humans applied the same approach in other areas of life. Teachers, leaders, and community organizers all recognized the same patterns. They understood that open dialogue required emotional safety. They understood that people respond differently when authority is present. Earth's diplomats had simply applied this knowledge to the global stage. This made him admire how humans transferred everyday wisdom to complex, international situations. He also noticed that humans continuously improved this approach. They trained diplomats in emotional intelligence, cultural sensitivity, and active listening. They simulated complex negotiation scenarios to help people practice handling delicate situations. They emphasized collaboration, empathy, and humility as key qualities. Military officers, while respected, were intentionally excluded from these discussions. It was not because they were incapable or untrusted. It was because their training, while valuable in other contexts, did not align with the subtle demands of global peace talks. The researcher found that this habit also helped Earth manage misunderstandings. Other nations sometimes assumed that Earth was hiding power or avoiding responsibility. They speculated about secret reasons, political strategies, or even weaknesses. But in reality, humans had chosen a simple, practical, and deeply human path. They wanted peace talks to be spaces of dialogue, not displays of strength. This transparency, even if misunderstood, reflected honesty and care in their approach. As he studied more, the researcher felt that he was beginning to see Earth as a society that prioritized human connection over appearances. They understood that small gestures, words, and attitudes could shape relationships. They valued listening over speaking, empathy over dominance, and trust over intimidation. Excluding military officers was just one expression of these values. It was a small action, but it had a large impact on creating environments where peace could be possible. By the end of his research on modern diplomatic culture, the researcher felt he had uncovered something profound. Earth's habit was not strange or secretive. It was thoughtful, intentional, and deeply human. It reflected centuries of learning, observation, and adaptation. It showed how humans carefully balance history, emotion, and strategy to create better outcomes. And most importantly, it showed that peace is built not by force or power, but by careful listening, understanding, and creating spaces where people feel safe to speak honestly. He realized that this lesson applied not only to global diplomacy, but also to everyday life. Humans everywhere, in small ways, follow the same principles. They avoid intimidating people in sensitive discussions. They encourage openness and honesty. They learn from past mistakes to create better environments for cooperation. The researcher felt that Earth's choice was a powerful example of human wisdom in action. Finally, he reflected on the human element behind these decisions. Humans are not perfect, but they care deeply about relationships, understanding, and fairness. They learn from mistakes, adapt, and pass lessons quietly to the next generation. By excluding military officers, Earth was not hiding anything or trying to manipulate others. It was simply honoring a human instinct to protect dialogue, trust, and understanding. And in doing so, they showed that real power often comes from patience, empathy, and care, not authority or force. The researcher had now spent months studying Earth's approach to peace summits, and he was beginning to see a bigger picture. It wasn't just about tradition or history. It was about humans themselves, the way they think, feel, and act in delicate situations. What he noticed most clearly was how much humans cared about the human element in diplomacy. They understood that every person in a conversation brought emotions, memories, and fears with them. And if a single presence, even if powerful or skilled, made someone uncomfortable, it could affect the entire discussion. Humans learned early in life that communication is more than just words. Body language, tone, facial expressions, and even silence all convey meaning. They understood that in tense situations, people are more honest when they feel safe. If someone feels judged, pressured, or intimidated, they may hide their true thoughts. Earth had taken this lesson from everyday life and applied it to peace talks. Diplomats were trained to notice the smallest signs of discomfort and to adjust their approach accordingly. Their goal was to create a space where people could speak openly, without fear of judgment or pressure. One thing the researcher noticed was how diplomats often use storytelling. Instead of giving orders or making statements, they share experiences, examples, and perspectives from their own lives. This helps others relate and feel understood. It is a simple but powerful human technique. When people feel connected, they are more willing to listen, share ideas, and compromise. The researcher realized that Earth had understood this principle intuitively. They relied on empathy, patience, and understanding rather than power or authority to build relationships. He also found that humans were careful to balance perspectives. In every discussion, diplomats made sure that no single voice dominated the conversation. They encouraged quieter participants to speak and made sure that stronger personalities did not unintentionally overpower others. This required constant attention, skill, and care. Every gesture, word, and pause mattered. The researcher saw that the absence of military officers was part of this strategy. Even a respectful, silent soldier could change the dynamics of a room. By keeping the delegation composed of diplomats trained in communication and empathy, Earth ensured that the conversation remained balanced and open. Another important point he discovered was that humans valued listening more than speaking. In ordinary life, humans often try to express their opinions first. But in sensitive discussions, They understand that listening comes first. Listening allows people to understand concerns, fears, and motivations. It creates trust. At peace summits, diplomats followed this rule strictly. They listened carefully, asked gentle questions, and repeated what they heard to confirm understanding. This process took time, patience, and humility. The researcher realized that it was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign of intelligence, emotional awareness, and maturity. Humans also understood that misunderstandings could escalate quickly if emotions were not managed. Even a single misinterpreted gesture or word could create tension. That's why Earth's diplomats worked so hard to remain calm, patient, and neutral. They were trained to notice small signs of discomfort and adjust their behavior. If someone looked nervous or hesitant, they would ask questions to clarify, reassure them, and guide the conversation gently. This careful attention to human behavior was a major reason why Earth avoided sending military officers. Soldiers are trained for focus, discipline, and leadership, which is valuable elsewhere. But in delicate human negotiations, even subtle displays of authority could unintentionally pressure participants. The researcher also noticed how humans use shared experiences to build trust. Diplomats would often refer to common challenges, historical lessons, or cultural similarities. These references helped others feel understood and connected. Trust is built slowly, step by step, and humans were very aware of this. They knew that no negotiation could succeed if people felt distant or alienated. By excluding the military, Earth ensured that all participants could focus on understanding one another, rather than being distracted or intimidated by symbols of power. He also observed that humans are naturally empathetic creatures. They can sense the feelings of others and adjust their behavior accordingly. This ability was central to Earth's approach to peace summits. Diplomats were trained not just in negotiation techniques, but also in emotional intelligence. They learned to notice discomfort, hesitation, and anxiety. They learned to reassure, encourage, and support others in ways that made them feel safe. The researcher realized that excluding military officers was a reflection of this deep human awareness. It was about protecting the emotional environments so that dialogue could flourish. The researcher also found that humans valued fairness and equality. They understood that every participant's voice mattered. In ordinary life, they practiced fairness in classrooms, workplaces, and families. In global diplomacy, this principle became even more important. By ensuring that no one felt overpowered or intimidated, Earth allowed honest conversations to take place. Every perspective could be shared, and every concern could be addressed. Military officers, respected though they were, could unintentionally shift this balance. Even their quiet presence could create a sense of authority, subtly affecting how others spoke. He also saw that humans were willing to learn from past mistakes. They didn't just rely on instinct, they studied history, reflected on past meetings, and adjusted their approach accordingly. When they noticed that the presence of authority figures could disrupt discussions, they made a conscious choice to avoid including military officers. This decision was not arbitrary. It was carefully considered, repeatedly tested, and reinforced over decades. It showed how humans combine experience, observation, and reflection to make better choices. The researcher was particularly struck by how humans approached problem solving. They believed that the best solutions come from collaboration, not dominance. If people feel pressured or intimidated, they cannot think clearly. They cannot share creative ideas. Earth's diplomats understood this better than anyone. They knew that peaceful solutions required open minds, trust, and cooperation. By creating an environment free from intimidation, they gave participants the best chance to work together effectively. He also noticed that humans value patience. Diplomacy is not about rushing decisions. It is about careful listening, understanding, and reflection. Even small misunderstandings can delay progress. So diplomats were trained to move slowly, observe carefully, and guide discussions gently. The absence of military officers helped maintain this pace. It ensured that participants focused on the conversation rather than reacting to symbols of power or authority. Patience, the researcher realized, was not a weakness. It was a strength that humans had learned to cultivate over generations. Humans also recognized that emotions are contagious. If one person feels nervous, frustrated, or defensive, it can affect the entire group. Diplomats were aware of this and worked hard to maintain a calm and balanced atmosphere. They used subtle gestures, gentle language, and careful tone to prevent misunderstandings. By keeping military officers out of the room, they reduced the risk of inadvertently creating stress. This careful management of emotional energy was a uniquely human skill. Refined over decades of observation and practice, not another thing the researcher noticed was that humans appreciated trust building over time. Relationships are not formed instantly. They grow slowly through repeated positive interactions. Peace summits were no different. Humans understood that lasting agreements required ongoing trust, not quick victories. Diplomats focused on building connections, listening, and understanding deeply. Military officers, while important in other contexts, could unintentionally shortcut this process because their presence might create a sense of pressure or expectation. Finally, the researcher realized that all of this reflected a fundamental human value: care. Humans care about relationships, emotions, and understanding. They want everyone to feel safe, respected, and heard. Excluding military officers was not about fear, strategy, or weakness. It was about protecting the delicate human element in every discussion. It was about giving trust, patience, and empathy the space to grow. By the end of his research for this part, the researcher felt that he truly understood Earth's approach. It was simple, human, and deeply thoughtful. Humans had learned from experience, observed carefully, and acted intentionally. They had created a culture where dialogue, trust, and understanding were prioritized over power, authority, or appearances. This careful attention to the human element ensured that peace talks were not just about agreements on paper, but about relationships, understanding, and lasting solutions. In reflecting on what he had learned, the researcher realized that Earth's choice was more than a diplomatic strategy. It was a reflection of human wisdom, empathy, and patience. It showed how humans combine observation, history, and emotional intelligence to create environments where people feel safe to speak openly and honestly. By valuing the human element above all else, Earth had found a way to foster peace that was both simple and profoundly effective. As the researcher continued to study Earth's approach to peace summits, he began to notice that not everyone agreed with the decision to exclude military officers. Inside Earth's own government and diplomatic circles, there were quiet debates, discussions, and disagreements about this practice. Some leaders believed that including military officers would show a complete representation of Earth's society. After all, the military was a significant part of human civilization. It had responsibilities, experience, and insights that could be valuable in global discussions. These leaders argued that excluding them might give other nations the wrong impression that Earth was hiding something or not showing its full capabilities. Other leaders strongly disagreed. They argued that peace summits were not about displaying strength, authority, or power. Their main concern was maintaining an atmosphere where everyone felt safe to speak openly. Including military officers, even as observers, could change the dynamics of the room. Delegates from other nations might feel pressure, become cautious, or speak less honestly. The discussions could lose their openness, and real solutions might not emerge. These leaders emphasized that the purpose of a peace summit was not to impress others with rank or power, But to build understanding, trust, and cooperation, the researcher found detailed records of these internal debates. He read meeting notes, memos, and letters where officials explained their positions. Some wrote that sending military officers might signal power instead of collaboration. Others responded that diplomacy without full representation could appear weak or incomplete. These debates were intense, but always private. They happened in offices, quiet conference rooms, and sometimes even over late-night conversations among senior leaders. The researcher noticed that no matter how strong the disagreements, Earth's ultimate decision never changed. That it became clear to him that this consistency reflected a deep human instinct. Humans learn from past mistakes, but they also weigh their values carefully. The decision to exclude military officers was rooted in decades of observation, experience, and reflection. Even when there were arguments, humans consistently chose the approach that prioritized dialogue, trust, and emotional safety. It was not a rule imposed by law or authority. It was a choice guided by human judgment, empathy, and understanding. He also discovered that the debates sometimes involved testing hypothetical situations. Leaders would imagine what might happen if military officers attended a summit. They would consider how other delegates might react, how discussions could shift, and whether misunderstandings might increase. These scenarios helped Earth's decision-makers evaluate potential risks and benefits. The consistent conclusion was always the same. Including military officers could create unintended pressure, and pressure often hinders honest communication. Humans valued understanding and collaboration over appearances or representation. The researcher found that these internal debates were not about fear, weakness, or hiding power. On the contrary, Earth had one of the most capable militaries in history. Leaders respected the military deeply and recognized its importance in defense and strategy. The debates were about timing, context, and environment. Military officers were invaluable in many areas, but peace summits required a very specific environment, one free from authority-induced pressure. The choice to exclude them was a deliberate, thoughtful, and highly human decision. He also noted that the debates highlighted an interesting balance between logic and emotion. Some leaders focused on strategy, security, and political optics. Others focused on empathy, human behavior, and trust building. Both perspectives were valid, but humans had learned that successful peace talks required a careful blend of both. The emotional environment mattered as much as strategic considerations. The researcher saw this as a reflection of humanity's complex nature. Humans are both rational and emotional, and the best decisions often take both aspects into account. In reading more about these debates, he discovered examples from past summits where the absence of military officers had actually helped resolve tense situations. In one case, delegates from two nations were deeply suspicious of each other. Tempers flared, and conversations almost broke down. But Earth's diplomats, trained in listening and empathy, guided the discussion gently. They asked questions, repeated concerns to show understanding, and reassured participants. Slowly, tension eased, and the delegates were able to reach a compromise. The researcher realized that even a silent presence of military officers could have shifted the room's dynamics and prevented this resolution. The researcher also found that humans continuously reevaluated their approach. Every few years, senior leaders and diplomats reviewed the policy. They considered new developments, changing international dynamics, and the evolving nature of human society. They asked themselves, is this approach still the best? Could we include military officers without creating pressure? Could we maintain trust while showing full representation? Each time, after careful consideration, they concluded that the existing approach worked best. It was flexible enough to adapt to new situations, yet consistent enough to provide stability and predictability. He noticed that this careful evaluation REFLECTED, humans' respect for learning. They did not blindly follow tradition. They studied, tested, and adjusted. But they also understood that some lessons, even if decades old, remain valid. The decision to exclude military officers was one of those lessons. It had proven effective over time, and humans valued its success. They understood that peace was fragile and required careful nurturing, not displays of power or authority. The researcher also saw that the internal debates helped maintain balance within Earth's own leadership. By discussing potential risks and benefits, leaders ensured that no one perspective dominated. They encouraged dialogue, questioned assumptions, and sought consensus. This process reflected the very principles they applied externally at peace summits. Humans were consistent. They practiced what they preached. By debating carefully and thoughtfully, they maintained a strong internal culture of reflection, empathy, and collaboration. He also observed that humans were aware of perception. They knew that other nations might misunderstand their approach. Some outsiders speculated that Earth was hiding power, avoiding responsibility, or making secret plans. But humans had learned to focus on their goals, not on speculation. They understood that their priority was to create a safe, open environment for dialogue. Misunderstandings could be corrected over time, but the atmosphere for honest communication had to be preserved first. That researcher found that the debates sometimes involved difficult compromises. Some leaders wanted to show strength, credibility, or full representation. Others wanted to prioritize emotional safety, trust, and understanding. They had to weigh the benefits of each approach carefully. Over time, humans consistently decided that the benefits of trust, honesty, and open dialogue outweighed the potential advantages of showing power. This choice reflected their values. Humans prioritized understanding, collaboration, and emotional intelligence over appearances or intimidation. He also noticed that the internal debates were not static. Humans allowed for flexibility and innovation. If a new situation arose that required military expertise, diplomats found ways to incorporate it without disrupting the delicate atmosphere. For example, technical advisors could provide insight in private sessions, or military leaders could offer guidance indirectly through diplomats. Humans were creative in balancing expertise with emotional safety. They found ways to honor both the need for knowledge and the need for dialogue. The researcher reflected on the human quality behind all of this. Humans are deeply reflective and aware of the consequences of their actions. They understand that a single choice can have wide-reaching effects. By debating internally, weighing risks, and considering emotional impact, humans demonstrated foresight, patience, and wisdom. Their decision to maintain a military-free presence at peace summits was not a matter of convenience. It was a deliberate, carefully considered choice shaped by centuries of observation and experience. He also realized that these internal challenges helped Earth improve its diplomacy over time. By constantly questioning, debating, and evaluating their policies, humans refined their approach. They learned what worked, what didn't, and how to adapt. This willingness to engage in honest internal dialogue strengthened their external diplomacy. It showed that humans valued learning, growth, and improvement as much as they valued peace itself. Finally, the researcher understood that Earth's consistency was a mark of strength, not weakness. It reflected confidence in their principles, clarity of purpose, and trust in human judgment. Despite internal disagreements, humans consistently chose the path that prioritized dialogue, empathy, and trust. Their ability to balance debate, reflection, and action showed a depth of wisdom that was uniquely human. By the end of his research for this part, the researcher felt he had uncovered an important truth. Earth's internal debates were not signs of conflict or confusion. They were a testament to humans' careful, reflective, and thoughtful nature. Even when disagreements arose, Humans chose the approach that protected the delicate process of dialogue. They prioritized understanding, patience, and emotional intelligence over power. After months of research, the researcher finally felt ready to understand the full picture. He had studied history, modern practices, internal debates, and the human element behind Earth's approach to peace summits. Now he could see the complete story of why Earth never brings its military to these gatherings. It was not about fear, secrecy, or weakness. It was about humanity, wisdom, and careful thought. He reflected on what he had learned from history first. Decades ago, a simple misunderstanding at an early summit had left a lasting impression. A military officer had spoken directly, without realizing how it would be received. That moment created tension and made Earth's leaders understand something very important. The atmosphere of a room matters as much as the words spoken. People respond not only to what is said, but to how it feels when they say it. This lesson became a guiding principle, passed quietly from one generation of diplomats to the next. Humans remembered, reflected, and adapted. The researcher realized that this approach showed a deep respect for experience. Humans study mistakes, small or large, and use them to guide future decisions. They are careful to balance lessons from the past with the needs of the present. By choosing not to send military officers to peace summits, they applied a simple but powerful human lesson. Open dialogue, trust, and emotional safety are the foundation of real peace. Military presence, even if well-intentioned, could disrupt that foundation. He also reflected on the modern practice of diplomacy. Earth's diplomats were trained to listen more than they spoke, to observe the smallest cues, and to adjust their behavior to maintain calm and balance. They shared stories, asked gentle questions, and encouraged participation from everyone. Their goal was not to dominate or impress, but to create a space where trust could grow naturally. The absence of military officers was not a limitation, but a tool to maintain this delicate environment. It allowed every delegate to feel equal, safe, and willing to share honest thoughts. The researcher considered the human element behind these choices. Humans are emotional, reflective, and empathetic creatures. They understand that people carry fears, memories, and emotions into every discussion. One small display of authority or power can change the way people speak and act. Humans noticed this early in their history and applied it consciously. A decision to exclude military officers was a recognition of human psychology. It acknowledged that emotional safety matters as much as strategy, knowledge, or intelligence in building agreements. He also reflected on the internal debates he had studied. Not everyone agreed with the policy, and that was part of what made it effective. Leaders and diplomats considered all perspectives carefully. Some argued for representation of all sectors, including the military. Others insisted on preserving emotional safety above all. The debates were honest, reflective, and thoughtful. Through them, humans refined their approach and confirmed their commitment to principles that prioritize dialogue, understanding, and trust. The researcher noticed that humans were patient in their approach. They knew that peace is not created overnight. It takes time, reflection, and care. Every discussion, every gesture, and every word mattered. By focusing on careful listening and empathy, Earth's diplomats created lasting solutions rather than temporary fixes. They valued slow, deliberate progress over quick victories. The absence of military officers supported this pace. It prevented sudden tension, allowing discussions to unfold naturally, thoughtfully, and peacefully. He also realized that this approach reflected humans' respect for relationships. Diplomacy is more than agreements on paper. It is about people, trust, and mutual understanding. Humans understood that once relationships were damaged, agreements would be fragile. By prioritizing emotional safety and openness, they nurtured trust. Military presence could unintentionally affect these relationships. Even if silent, authority figures can create subtle pressure. Humans chose to prevent that, demonstrating foresight and care. The researcher thought about how humans consistently applied these principles in daily life as well. Teachers, managers, community leaders, and families often avoid intimidating people in sensitive discussions. They encourage honesty, patience, and empathy. Earth had taken these everyday lessons and applied them to the global stage. It was a human solution, simple in principle but powerful in effect. By valuing emotional safety and equality, humans created environments where real dialogue and cooperation could flourish. He reflected on the broader lessons from this study. Humans do not rely solely on power, authority, or appearances to solve problems. They rely on understanding, empathy, patience, and trust. They recognize that strong relationships and clear communication are often more effective than dominance or displays of strength. The choice to exclude military officers was not about hiding power. It was about creating the conditions for honest, meaningful discussion. The researcher also realized that Earth's approach had a ripple effect. Other nations often misunderstood it. They assumed there were secrets, hidden strategies, or weaknesses. Yet over time, they began to notice the results. Peace talks led by Earth's diplomats often produced stronger agreements, deeper trust, and better long-term collaboration than meetings that included military authority. Slowly, outsiders began to appreciate that Earth's method was thoughtful, human, and effective. He saw that the principle behind this approach extended beyond diplomacy. It was about humans themselves. They value reflection, observation, and learning from experience. They respect emotional safety, fairness, and equality. They understand that small gestures, words, and attitudes can shape relationships. By applying these lessons to peace summits, humans demonstrated a profound understanding of both human nature and the delicate art of negotiation. The researcher also noticed the humility in humans' approach. They did not assume their way was perfect. They reflected, debated, and adapted over time. They sought feedback and revised strategies when needed. Yet despite internal disagreements, they remained committed to principles that prioritized dialogue, empathy, and trust. This humility, combined with patience and reflection, allowed them to build lasting solutions in a complex and often tense world. He reflected on the emotional intelligence that humans cultivated. Diplomats were trained to sense discomfort, hesitation, or fear. They adjusted tone, gestures, and words to create comfort. They guided discussions slowly, asking questions instead of giving orders, sharing experiences instead of imposing opinions. Every step was intentional, every word measured, and every action aimed at preserving trust. Military presence could disrupt this delicate balance. Excluding it allowed the human approach to function. OPTIMALLY. The researcher considered the symbolic meaning of this decision. By choosing dialogue over authority, empathy over power, and trust over intimidation, humans demonstrated what mattered most to them. They showed that lasting peace is built not through force, but through understanding, patience, and care. This choice reflected their values, priorities, and deep respect for one another. It also showed that even small, thoughtful actions could shape major decisions with long-term impact. He realized that the true cause behind Earth never bringing military officers to peace summits was simple but profound. It was about humans recognizing what makes peace possible: emotional safety, open dialogue, trust, empathy, patience, and careful listening. These qualities, though subtle, are essential to resolving conflicts and building lasting solutions. The absence of military officers was a small but critical part of creating the conditions for these qualities to flourish. Finally, the researcher understood that Earth's approach was a lesson for the entire world. It demonstrated that sometimes the simplest human truths like empathy, patience, and trust can be more powerful than displays of strength or authority. It showed that thoughtful reflection, learning from past experiences, and prioritizing emotional safety can guide decisions with lasting impact. It was not a mystery, a secret, or a weakness. It was a testament to human wisdom, insight, and understanding. By the end of his research, the researcher felt a sense of clarity and admiration. He saw that Earth's approach to peace summits was not just a strategy, it was a reflection of humanity itself. Humans had chosen to nurture trust, protect dialogue, and foster cooperation. They had learned from the past, adapted in the present, and created a path that ensured meaningful, lasting peace. The researcher knew that this insight could help others see Earth's decisions in a new light, not as strange or secretive, but as deeply human and profoundly wise. And in that understanding, he realized the most important lesson of all, that the true power of humans lies not in authority or force, but in care, patience, empathy, and the courage to prioritize understanding over dominance. This was the real cause behind Earth never bringing its military to peace summits, and it was a cause rooted deeply in the human heart.